everyone, and welcome to the 11th episode of Dev Show. My name is Sherry Liz, and I'm your host today, together with my good friend, Goran Vukcik. So, Goran, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Sherry. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me over. Name is Goran Vukcic. I'm originally from Croatia, but I live and work in Malmo. I work for a company named Stratitech as technical manager. What else? I really like Dev Show. I think I watched every episode, so thanks for inviting me for co-hosting. And I also think I have a bit cooler t-shirt than you.
You have to bring it up, true?
Of course.
So for those of you that you're not aware of this joke, is that actually I produced that t-shirt for literally myself, and then last year at Tech Barbecue, Goran took it somehow. So.
Sorry.
Yeah, but you don't have this one, so.
Yeah.
Yes, great. So we have a pretty cool topic to cover and a very packed agenda. So maybe we better get started. So maybe Goran, you can talk about the topic that we are going to cover as well.
Yeah, sure. It's a really cool topic, and today we will hear mostly about three things. We will hear about access control and how to be responsible in regards to who has the access and like why is that important. We will also hear about monitoring, how to get going to set up monitoring of your resources in Azure, and we will hear about automation, like how to set it up for your deployments and Azure.
Great, and I'm so looking forward to actually to hear all of these points from our speakers. So before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to remind you that please use our kind of that chat functionality, no matter if you're watching us through Twitch or YouTube. Let us know that where you are watching us from. And if you have any question from our speaker later on, please ask them, highlight them during the actually while he's talking, and we are going to ask this question from our speaker later on. But one thing, please, that since we really want to have an inclusive environment for everybody, I really recommend you to familiarize yourself with our code of conduct, which is highlighted our main meetup page. And I guess now we can bring our speaker. Hi, Magnus. So yes, many of you, I'm pretty sure that you already know Magnus, but because he's pretty active in the community. He's a consultant and has his own company, which is called Loftysoft, and focusing on Azure. He is actually the first MVP in whole Nordic countries, and now
for Azure.
Microsoft Regional Director. And he's also organizer of many meetups and community-driven events such as Global Azure as well. He lived in Malmö in Sweden, and yes, one thing that he really likes is his outdoor kitchen and his barbecue, and I can totally approve that because I'm following you, all of the pictures that you are posting all the time about your barbecue. And last year, actually, you invited me there, but I was in Bornholm, actually. I couldn't join. So, yes, I would say that the stage is yours, and we are looking forward to your talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, what a great introduction. I'm very happy to be here, virtually talking again, right? During these pandemic times, that's how we go. But it's still cool to be live and to be able to give a talk. And if you have any thoughts, questions at all, send me a tweet. My Twitter handle is on the screen here. Send a tweet or send a question for now for the actual stream here. If you have any follow-ups, just tweet me and I'll see what I can do to help. So the topic today is, well, it could actually contain anything, which is good, because then that means that I can talk about exactly what I like to talk about. But what I've seen with companies and people that are going to the cloud is that they are, just by going to the cloud, you're doing something good. You're getting better. You're starting to use the cloud rather than old IT sort of grounded technology, if you will. But there's several common things that I noticed that companies and people and teams are not doing very well, and that's kind of preventing them from becoming great. And it's got to do with the very fundamentals, if you will, of your environment. And, in the interest of time, I could probably talk about Azure fundamentals and Azure related topics for the better part of a week. But we will focus on these three today. 3 areas that I personally work a lot with together with my customers, and where I see that a lot of people are not getting it right. So it's access control and monitoring and automation, and that's probably all we're going to have time for. I would have wanted to have additional topics, but that'll be for a next episode or something. And I cannot see a lot from you guys, the audience today, right? So you'll have to interact with me, send me a message or something, so that I know that you're there and alive and listening and so forth. For myself, I've been talking about Azure for a long time, traveled the world quite literally to talk about Azure and present and give training on Azure and stuff. My day-to-day job is of course consulting, but this one here is a picture that I dug up. It's even got the old format, the squared kind of 4x3 format of presentations. This is my first presentation on what was called Windows Azure back then, when Azure was just announced in 2008. The Swedish title here says Utveckla lösningar på Windows Azure med ASP.NET, which means develop solutions on Windows Azure with ASP.NET. That was what we were doing back then. We were talking about how Windows Azure, as it was named, is the foundation of Microsoft's cloud platform. And we were talking about how it's the operating system for the cloud. And this kind of means that I've been talking about Azure professionally and consulting about Azure professionally for more than 12 years now. And as indicated in the intro here so graciously by Sherry, I was the first Azure MVP in the Nordic countries. So now there's many, of course, but back then there were almost no MVPs for Azure at all, and I was one of the ones in the sort of the starting batch there. Microsoft Regional Director, just a quick clarification. It doesn't mean that I work for Microsoft. It sounds like, right? But I don't work for Microsoft. I don't have a region, and I also don't direct anything. But it is a sort of an honorary title, if you will. It means that I am very connected to Microsoft, and we talk a lot on sort of VP level. I talk to Microsoft and give feedback from the world. So that's pretty fun. Again, send me a nice tweet if you like the show. Send me an email if you don't. And with those words, right? I also want to draw attention to the fact that we have announced, this is the old last virtual global Azure bootcamp thing we did in April of this year. We have just announced, this was listed as 2019, right? But we have announced that we're going to do one in 2021. But in 2019, there were about 300 locations. In 2020, we did a virtual event because everything went virtual this spring, as you very well know. And then we had 248 speakers and 319 sessions for our virtual event in April of 2020, as the logo says right up here. We have announced that we will be doing a global Azure virtual event in 2021 in the spring again, but we haven't come out with more details than that. So let's dive in and talk about the topic for today. And we'll just note that the cloud means the largest IT migration in the history of our industry. And with that comes the fact that a lot of companies, a lot of teams and projects and software is moving to the cloud, where the people on those teams are not yet very experienced in Azure. So they have done maybe, they have years and years of experience, and they're really good at technology. And, they're engineers, they're really, really profound, and they can build great things, but they haven't used the cloud. And so they start using the cloud, and they start listening to the advice they get from people and from the documentation from Microsoft, and trying to understand there are certain things that they need to focus on, where I find that a lot of people are doing, again, making some mistakes, right? So access control in Azure is known as role-based access control, or RBAC. In fact, RBAC hasn't always been available in Azure. Before that, it was basically an all or nothing proposition. Either you had full access to everything in an Azure subscription, or you didn't have any access at all. That was it was completely binary. But then Microsoft implemented role-based access control, and here we are. And now you can grant more granular access to the resources, websites, databases, and whatever you have in Azure. Now, there are some challenges with this. First of all, many people get it wrong. And they go like, well, that Azure stuff, that's tech business, right? We'll let the tech people sort that out, and we'll just go ahead and assign ownership to that area for all the developers, because that's really convenient, right? Because then everybody can just, fix everything at once. Turns out that's not a great idea, because now all of a sudden people are randomly changing things, and you kind of don't have any control. What also happens if a disgruntled employee is leaving the company and they bring some confidential IP with them? That's probably not a great scenario. Same with mistakes, because we're human, we're going to make mistakes. For instance, we're going to select the incorrect environment because we have access to production. We meant to deploy a connection string to a development environment, but instead we did it to production. Oops, it just happened. So there are many things that are indicators that you should maybe not give full access to everyone in the development team. Also, we haven't even begun talking about compliance, right? So in Azure, you have something called the Resource Manager API. And whenever you do any changes with that API, it always logs your actions. Always, there's a trail, an audit trail, which shows who did what to what, in fact. You can, if you want to, explicitly lock critical resources and prevent users from deleting or modifying them. Those locks are also something that I see that a lot of people are just not using, and there's no reason for not using them. They're just not doing that. They could include the locks in their deployments, but it's just not being done. And so the specific access, the specific actions that you want to take in your organization, you can grant very granular, very specific access, saying that maybe a person doesn't have access to modify production, but they have access to make a swap of the application from staging into production. So you can go very granular in this area and just really, really get down to the nitty-gritty if you are able to, if you know what to do. The first thing that I find that a lot of people are not getting right is this scope concept. In role-based access control, there are three factors. Who is getting the access? A person, a group of people, or a service principal, a system account. Who is getting the access? And then it's what kind of access? Is it contributor? Is it reader? Is it any other kind of specific role? But there's a third component, and that's called the scope. And the scope works like this. You have a subscription or many subscriptions, but we're using the subscription as the base scope here. Inside of that, you put a lot of various resource groups, which is just logical groupings of your Azure resources. And in those, you put some resources. So to translate that into access levels for people, You have at the topmost level there in a red shirt, that's probably Scott Guthrie with his red polo, with his red shirt, and that's he's the owner here, and he can have access to everything. He might have some contributors that he is also granting access to see everything at this level and be sort of his co-workers, because he can't, he doesn't have time to do everything in this company. And a lot of people might just be readers here on this level, so they can have a group of readers who can just see all the things we have, but they can't change them. And they can't see any secrets as well. But then you can grant access on every one of these levels, in fact, to resource group level. Maybe a team has access to the resource group level, and then or department maybe, and then a team on the lower level down to the resources, at least hypothetically. But I have an approach here, and there's a reason for this approach. I'm just going to explain it first, and then I'm going to show you the problem that not using this approach actually could cause for you in Azure. There's an important thing to recognize, that there's two players in role-based access control. Your users and security groups and service principals, they're stored in the Azure Active Directory, but the access that you grant when you make an access modification, that's stored in Azure. And you have this split world where the facts about the access is stored in Azure, but the object to which the access was granted is actually in the Active Directory. And that causes some friction. And my suggested approach to handling this is the following. I'll show by example. You have a department where you create a user group in your Active Directory, department foo in this case, excuse me, and you add all the people in that department to that user group. If these people have access to certain resources, you can then take the user group, you define an access group in Azure, say that all of these resource groups are application 1, and I'll define an access group for that and say that read access for this is the specification for this access group. And this green app1 readers access group is in the Active Directory indeed, but it has access in Azure to a certain role and a certain scope. So what you would do then to grant department foo access to these Azure resources is that you would grant the organizational group access, or make it a member of the access group. And thereby every individual inside of the red circle now by reference here has read access to these resource groups and can see all the resources in Azure. And next example is that we have a user group of a team, and they are contributors to a certain set of resources and access and resource groups. And then you do the same here, and you grant them access similarly. This way of granting it means that we are mapping the access using the AAD Graph, because in the AAD you can see what does Alice have access to, which groups is Alice included in, and by reference there you can know that this access group named with this name has the following access over in Azure, and we don't need to go to Azure to actually find out. By convention, the name we need is already in the Active Directory. And to show you exactly what that looks like, where the problem begins, I'll go over to the Azure portal. Here's a resource group in Azure, in the Azure portal that I have set up for us. And as you can see here, we have a bunch of resources here. I've just basically almost random resources that I created. But for the access control part, you can see who is assigned to have access here. Before this, this presentation, I created two access groups that I called Demo 1 and Demo 2, and I gave them read access. You can see here that the security group Magnus Demo 1 has in fact read access here. Maybe the naming convention is kind of off, but you can see that members of this group here have access. Now, the thing I said about before that my object is stored in the Active Directory, I also created a group called Magnus Demo 2 in my AD. And I granted it also access here. And then I went to the AD and deleted my group. So the group doesn't exist anymore. But Azure still remembers that there was a group, there was an object in the AD some time ago that had access here. So it effectively that bit of information about the access is still here, but Azure cannot read the actual identity of the object which was in my AD, but it's now gone. And you don't want to have this sort of scenario. Inversely, if this person up here, this is a demo account that I use, a person called Demo Dave, he works in my company. If he leaves my company, I might go and suspend his account and not delete him from the directory. Typically you just suspend the account so you can't sign in. And maybe Demo Dave has already left the company. And then like weeks later, somebody comes in here and they're looking about and says, Demo Dave, who's Demo Dave? Does he work here? No, he quit a month ago, but you can still see his access here, which is stupid. So I never go and add, I build myself out of that problem. For my demo environment here, of course, I am the user here explicitly, but I really shouldn't be. And in real environments, I'm not. So these problems, I don't like them. And I kind of design around it by using access groups in the way that I showed you before. So definitely use organizational accounts when you give access, not Microsoft accounts. You could use Microsoft accounts, but don't do that. Use resource group access, not subscription level access, because generally speaking, giving subscription level access to anyone means that they can modify, of course, everything inside of the whole subscription if they have contributor access, let's say. And usually that's not a good idea. It grants too much access, and then much later somebody else will deploy something new to that subscription, and they'll be unaware. They won't realize that a lot of other people have access to the things. So manage access using groups the way I showed you, and try to grant least privileged access. So again, what I said, don't grant subscription level access if you could go lower. If somebody doesn't need contributor access or ownership, then just grant them read access. And then there's also ways using this activity log to keep track of access changes, to get notified when access has changed for anyone for any reason. So you can audit these things. Cool. That was access. And we don't have we only have a short presentation time here today, so we'll just jump straight into the next topic, which is monitoring. And monitoring, the monitoring sort of premise for the cloud is an interesting one. Here's, by example, a company called Acme. They had a CTO that I worked with, and they said, we have this customer dissatisfaction problem or challenge here, where our customers are complaining about the performance of our application. So while we are figuring out what might be a performance bottleneck within our application, we're going to turn off auto scale and set the instance count really high, so we know that we have enough performance for the customers, for a while. And 5 months later, this is the same CTO burning money. Still, everything is running on maximum, and the company is paying so much for their environments just because they still haven't figured things out. And then some months after that, the enterprise agreement that this company had set up, that Acme had set up with Microsoft, that's already run out of money. And so this is actual footage of the CFO renegotiating the contract with Microsoft, trying to figure out where all the money went. So this is not a great idea. And what should you be doing then? Well, first you need to realize that monitoring in Azure is a shared responsibility between the customer and the vendor. So the cloud service provider, in this case, Azure, provides you with monitoring capabilities, right? You can monitor the physical infrastructure, the network, all those things. That's Microsoft's job. They give you the resources to do proper monitoring. And then your role here is to implement monitoring best practices and educate the team members in understanding what to do. So some people might distrust this first claim here that Microsoft is willing to help you optimize to save costs. But they are, because Microsoft is in Azure for the long game, right? They want to have customers that keep being customers, that are happy over a long time about the fact that they can optimize their spend in Azure. And if they can have many more happy, optimized customers that keep spending, Microsoft can fit additional customers inside the same data centers, because a data center might be infinite for you, but it's certainly not going to be infinite for Microsoft. So what we need to understand as a company who has the responsibility to handle our applications is the following. This is a cross-disciplinary thing, and it's company-wide, right? So in operations, in cloud operations, there's somebody monitoring the application. And they are collecting real feedback from production saying, okay, this server seems to be running kind of slow, or, there's a bottleneck somewhere. We're noticing customer dissatisfaction, whatever it is. That's for operation to monitor and find out what's happening with the application in reality. Now, of course, they will gather, they should be able to collect this feedback and send it back to development to implement a modification and optimization. But in order for operations to have anything to do in the first place, development also needs to implement the ability to monitor in the applications, right? So make them operational, if you will, so that operations can actually do their job and provide feedback from how the applications actually run. And business and marketing, they need to understand what do they want to measure? How do we measure success? What's an interesting piece of data to keep track of? How do we measure customer satisfaction? And that actually goes to, business and marketing, other departments than technical people, right? That need to understand and be involved in how do we measure success. So these responsibilities go across the entire organization. And I see a lot of people failing here because they think it's only a technical problem. So when you're using the cloud platform of your choice here, you're being measured, right? At the end of the month, you're getting the exact bill with the exact bit and byte you have consumed, and down to the cent, you get exactly what to pay precisely for your consumption. So in other words, if you use it, then you pay for it. So this whole part of monitoring goes into the realm of optimization. So if you are being measured, if Azure measure you, your automatic response is that then in that case, you also measure you. So you know how you perform, so you know what you are doing. And I can't tell you how many times I've come to a customer and they have created an improvement because they had a performance problem. They create an improvement and they put that improvement out there, but they didn't actually know what performance was before. They just got some kind of fuzzy report saying something is slow. They didn't bother to measure what the speed was that caused people to feel that it was slow, but they just went and optimized randomly. And you wouldn't know, honestly, if your efforts were actually valuable at all, unless you measure. The challenge for monitoring in Azure is that you have your application monitoring. Sure, that's built into your application, hopefully. You have the operating system that you're running on, if you're running on a VM or some kind of stack that you have. You have your Azure resources that are running, maybe a Redis cache or a Key Vault or whatever it is that might have performance indicators as well. And that stuff is running on a subscription, which can have its own level of notifications and things happening. And of course, it's all connected to an Azure tenant. Plus, maybe you have some custom sources of data as well that we haven't even listed here. And there are so many data sources and so much data, and these silos that this data is involved in is kind of frustrating and infuriating. So what Microsoft did, of course, this problem was something that they got reported from everyone saying, how can I make sense of all these various data sources that are in there in the cloud? What can I do here with this? So Microsoft worked on the Azure Monitor, which is the unified location for all monitoring inside of Azure. So I'm just going to maybe quickly walk you through that, because what I have seen is that people have this scenario, right? They haven't really fully started using monitoring, Azure Monitor. I see companies having their mission critical business solutions in Azure, but they're not using Azure Monitor, and it just doesn't make any sense at all. So as a walkthrough of that functionality, it starts to the left here, where you configure your applications to gather up metrics and logs and all kinds of data and input that into Azure Monitor. And stuff that is very commonly known is the log analytics workspace and also the application insights. Those are commonly known pieces that are in Azure Monitor, and they're now sort of found inside of Azure Monitor. They were not part of Azure Monitor before. They were separate solutions, but now they're kind of inside of that umbrella, if you will. A very important another piece here is alerts or alerting. Before Azure Monitor, every service in Azure implemented their own alerting system, which meant that Microsoft would have to implement it n times, one time for every service they have in Azure. They would all need to implement their own version of alerting. And that's really such a huge waste. So Azure Monitor contains a centralized alerting system. And it's actually a little bit funny, because the fact that alerts existed in so many places before has some interesting consequences. And I'd like to sort of tell the tale of how Azure is versioning things. Something can either be in preview. It could be sort of the current version, which just doesn't really have a label, but preview is in parentheses like that. If you see something preview, it means it doesn't have an SLA. It means it's not yet a generally available feature of Azure. It's there for preview purposes. And then if something is deprecated, something is old, then it's called classic instead. So it's a beautiful turn of phrase, rather than saying beta, production, and deprecated, which is the words we would used to use back in the day, right? But I guess in the cloud, it's preview, it's classic, or it's current. Preview means, again, no SLA. Classic means you should probably be doing something else. If you see that you're using a service marked classic, you should look around to figure out what has Microsoft replaced this with, because it's not going away today or tomorrow or anytime soon, but it is also not going to get any more features. It's going to be in maintenance mode, and eventually it will be deprecated or removed. But for now, it's there as classic, and you should really be implementing something else, hopefully something that is current. Funny enough, for a short time there, the new alerting system was in preview. The Azure Monitor alert system was in preview, and at the same time, the current alerting system for several of the services were in classic mode. So there wasn't actually a current one. Of course, that meant you would be using classic, but it was kind of limbo for a while there. A little bit fun, a little bit sort of teasing a little bit with Microsoft about this, but it's preview or classic, friends. That's how it goes. So alerting is included in Azure Monitor. And there are all these solutions, all these monitoring solutions for VMs, for VNets, for containers and applications that offer you sort of a higher level solution with lots of features and functionality on top of Azure Monitor. Application insights, again, being the most commonly known one. For VMs, you deploy an agent to the VM, and you get a lot of insights from that agent. After you have gathered your data and you're using your insights and you're setting up your alerts, you might want to begin to analyze your data. And you can do that inside of Log Analytics immediately with the Metrics Explorer. All the data that you collect, whether it's metrics or logs, all end up in your Log Analytic workspace. And you have the ability to query that data and do whatever you want with that data and alert on anything you find and take action on anything you find in your data. So for the VM logs, of course, this picture, right? This is a screenshot of Performance Monitor. So typically back in the day, we would remote to the VM where we have our application running, and we'd crack open Performance Monitor and see how the application is performing. I've done this so many times, countless of times. But when you're running in Azure, running in the cloud, this is really not the convenient way of doing it anymore. You might also have, hopefully your business is doing great and you have many, many, many VMs or many, many application servers that you're running on for some reason. And then it's not convenient to remote to the machines, even though you can. So instead, you would use the Metrics Explorer in Azure and go to the VM Performance Blade to see your exact performance of the VM. You could see all the things there, such as the, in this case, the disk performance, the CPU utilization, the memory availability, and so forth. So basically, you can see that the Metrics Explorer kind of is remote perfmon, if you will, right? It has the same functionality. After you have analyzed your stuff, it's really important to know how, or to be able to visualize things. You can build dashboards in Azure, bring out various kinds of views. You could use Power BI to surface data. And with Power BI embedded, you could even build small applications that kind of show key metrics and performance counts and stuff, like how many orders have been placed in our system, or how many orders are on back order, and so forth. Things that you could then show to marketing people that are, or sales people that are very interested in those kinds of numbers. How much money have we earned? That sort of thing. And alerting is part of the response functionality, if you will. Any data that you find in your Metrics Explorer, anything that you can write a query on and find any data, you can make an alert for that. And you could send that alert using all kinds of technologies, email, text message, whatever you want, even call a webhook, which is really cool. And also there's a shared functionality for auto scaling built into Azure Monitor that you can take advantage of if you need to respond on certain performance indicators and auto scale your application based on how many users, based on their latency or whatever it is. So you can set up auto scaling to really optimize the usage level of your instances that you are running. And of course, again, this is your data. If you need to integrate this data and send it further along to something else, you could send it straight from your Log Analytics workspace and export it to another system. Somebody might be using Splunk, you can export to Splunk, or if you want to go the other way, you can import from Splunk as well. It doesn't matter, right? It's your data, you do whatever you want with that data. Some people need to take a subset of the data, maybe some audit trails, and maybe store them forever or for a very long time. You can use this integrate functionality to do that as well. Cool. So there's a lot of features in Azure Monitor, and is part of a sort of a larger story of feedback that some of the friends in the MVP community and myself have been given to Microsoft, saying, listen guys, what is it that we want here? Well, before I talked about the very many silos of information, of data. We had, your application layer, the app service, the stack you're running on, and stuff that gives various kinds of data for feedback and monitoring data. What we wanted was sort of a single pane of glass experience where we could go to like a dashboard and see exactly what is it that we have that pertains to our application. And Microsoft is in fact working on this with this Azure Monitor story for resource groups. And this is actually a preview still. If you have here I have a resource group that I'm focusing in on here. If you scroll in that resource group down to monitoring, you'll see that there's an Insights preview button you can click. And again, for this purpose of these demonstrations, I just deployed a set of resources, like a standard set of demo resources that I have, which includes a storage account, and there's a little VNet for my VM that I have here. I have a compute VM. I also have an app service plan, and this app service plan has 2 applications or web apps that I have here. And there's also an application insights instance, and I have deployed everything. And so all of these resources are currently inside of my resource group. And I can see them here in this monitoring insights sort of dashboard. I haven't set up any alerts here. Maybe I should have had something that gave you an alert here. That would have been nice. But if there was an alert, I would see a red exclamation point here, and I could take action. I could click immediately into the alert and see, there's something wrong with a part of my application. But also what I can do from here is I can take action if I want to, and I'll see that this web application that I've deployed here, it's not configured to collect data for Azure Monitor. And I could go in here and I could actually enable that collection straight from here to take action. I can see the status of my things. I can perform certain actions from in here. The VM, there's supposed to be, oh wait, there's a VM there. I can click on that and say, view the metrics of my VM. I can go and drill into the data collected about, in this case, my VM, straight from this view. And I find that pretty powerful. And I think that this is going to be a huge, interesting feature for the future. I hope that it will be. Anyway, so the biggest piece of advice, I'll actually save that piece of advice for the end. And then we'll talk a little bit about automation. We have as the final topic of today. So automation is funny because I see a lot of people say that, I'll set it up manually for now, and then I'll automate it later. That's really, really smart. But it's not. It turns out that a lot of people keep using manual deployments and manual provisioning forever if they don't start off on the right foot. And that is to set everything up as automated deployments from the beginning. One big reason for having automated deployments is that you have multiple environments, right? You have a development environment, many of those, or multiple of those maybe, test or QA environments, you have staging or acceptance or whatever you call it, and you might have deployment of production to maybe even multiple regions around the world. And this is, of course, a big challenge. And what you need, the approach that you need to begin to have in this context is to view it as a production pipeline, as a production line, where you can deploy the same resources to multiple environments and then maintain them easily, and even set up temporary environments. I want a new testing environment for something that we're deploying just today, just to try something out. And I've actually come up with a pretty good test, a pretty accurate test in terms of how much have you automated in your organization. If I can walk up to your Azure and delete the testing environment and you don't freak out about it, then you probably automated an appropriate amount. If you get really scared, like, no, don't delete that, don't touch it, then maybe you haven't automated enough, right? It's a pretty good test. So I want to explain briefly here what is the resource API for Azure, the resource providers API. you have all these providers, right? You can provision VMs or SQL databases, whatever it is, and you interact with that because it implements a provider contract. And on your side of things, you use the Azure portal tools or some SDKs or even the command line to talk to your Azure resources. There's an API in between there called the management API, the ARM API. And that thing is something that you have to go through in order to reach to your resources. Fortunately, you don't need to know how to talk exactly to that API using REST and HTTP. So instead, you would go and use some kind of tooling, right? So the Azure portal, of course, use the tooling built into your Visual Studio or your Visual Studio Code. Microsoft has not one, but two open source command line implementations. One is PowerShell and the other one is the Azure CLI. You can write code in your favorite language that can modify your Azure resources as well. And then there's this interesting level of domain-specific languages where you can use something called Terraform, a very well-known deployment methodology or language, or actually something from Microsoft now called Bicep, which I'm going to show you in a second. But again, it doesn't matter which one of these above in the list that you would use. They would all eventually call over HTTP and REST to this API, to this endpoint to get things done. And the body of that request that you send is always going to be an ARM template. And if you have resources in Azure, you can click automation or template, and you can get for your Azure resources a template describing specifically your resources. An ARM template is a JSON file. And JSON is kind of, it's a very specific language where you specify all the things in JSON notation that you need for your Azure resources. So if you need to deploy an Azure resource, you would make a request to the API saying, hey, Azure Management API, I want to deploy the following template. What would that be? Well, that would specifically be the deployment of a storage account. So you see here that the type of thing I'm deploying is a storage account, and the name of it is the following. So this is just the smallest possible example of a template, and already here, it's for me, it's easy to see. I don't even see the JSON, right? But for somebody who saw this for the first time, it's like, okay, this is JSON notation. It's very specific. It's cool though, but it has to be exactly right for this request to make any sense. So ARM templates have a bit of complexity to them. These template files can be hundreds or even thousands of lines in size. They're very detailed and very specific. The JSON notation has to be exactly right. If that wasn't enough, you can also start to nest templates within templates to do like sub-deployments, or you can have a template that links off to a different template somewhere else. And that's where things can really start to fall apart really quickly. And inside of your templates, you can deploy maybe multiple resources in a loop, or you can start calling into some kind of function to get some sort of functionality from the platform you're deploying to. And all of a sudden, it's starting to look like you're writing some kind of programming or some coding here. And operations people or IT people maybe are not super fond of using or of coding, actually. So this is where, again, the domain-specific languages come in handy, because ARM template JSON notation is kind of specific. So HashiCorp has built an implementation that a lot of people are using, and now Microsoft has one called Bicep. Terraform would look like this. This is a Terraform example. And then this is what that would look like. And I want to show you a brief Bicep demo here that I have. I have my parameter file in JSON. And it's kind of funny because this file here doesn't have, there isn't a deployment JSON file. I only have a parameter file with an application name here. It says Magnus demo, Magnus 42 demo is going to be the application name. And instead of a web app JSON file to specify my template, I have this bicep file here. And my color coding is not really following. There we go. Here's the color coding. This is just preview tooling for bicep. This is the experimental bicep language is not released yet. It's just something that Microsoft is currently working on. You see that I get a parameter into my file here. I can specify some variables. I can even use one of those ARM functions that I talked about. And then I specify my resources. Here is a server farm, which is also known as an app service plan. I specify the name, the location, the size of it, and I provide the name to it. And then I specify a website, a Microsoft.web/site, and I give it a location and so forth. And I connect it to my server farm, the server farm that I wrote just above here. I also specify, in fact, an output here. Now, if I wanted to make sure that I actually am in the right location here. Still setting up. So right, there we go. If I wanted to run this thing, I have installed on my machine Bicep. You can see that I can invoke Bicep here. If I run Bicep using my Bicep file as an input, you'll notice over here that it creates an output file, a web app JSON file. So my Bicep was transpiled or translated right into an ARM template. So all of this ARM template stuff, I now didn't need to write. You can see that I have the parameters specified, that I have variables coming in, resources specified in here, my website and so forth, and even the output is specified here. So either if you use, of course, Terraform is production worthy now, or you start looking at using Bicep for the future, maybe, it's still pretty cool. And I kind of like the notion of using a domain-specific language for the automation because it makes a lot more sense. So the reason for using ARM or automation using maybe ARM templates for Azure is that you remove human error. You automate things to remove us from the equation. We're the ones that kind of make errors. You know that you deploy environments that are exactly the same because you use the exact same template to deploy multiple environments. And you get confidence and speed in your deployments. So we are near the end of this presentation. There's so much to talk about. Oh my gosh, I can go all week long. But to quickly go back to the key things that I covered here today is that you should, when you're thinking about access control, think about granting access to resource group level, not subscription level, and use AAD security groups when you do it so you don't get any ghosts inside of Azure. Also, appoint a resource owner with a budget. And this is one very, very interesting key thing. If every Azure resource that you have is tagged with an owner who has a budget, that person is going to be very, very interested in monitoring, in performance monitoring, in optimization, and in automation. All of those things are interesting to someone who is running Azure resources with a budget. So that's a key thing. Think about in your organization, is somebody responsible for your Azure resources? And then, of course, you need to spend the time to learn how to automate, because it's going to come back to you tenfold because you remove human error, you get confident, you get fast. And these are some of the things that you need to understand about Azure. All right. If there's anything else, please reach out to me and let me know what you thought about this session. And I guess that's it. We're on time, I guess.
Yes, great. It was a really great and insightful presentation. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Magnus.
Thanks.
We have only 3 minutes to wrap up because
I know there's so much to talk about.
Yeah, it was a really good topic, and we really want to have you back again.
Right.
And so very quickly, we really need your feedback. So I post the link in the chat as well. So please let us know what you want us to improve, and if you want to actually give us a speak at the show as well, please fill out the feedback form. And I also posted the link to get your Azure Heroes badges. Please claim that one as well. And we are going forward about our upcoming event. So next week, as usual, at the same time, we have a talk with Sabiha. She's going to talk about P5 library, which used to create a reactive, interactive art and games in JavaScript. And there will be a migration from Azure to DevOps by our friends in from Azure DevOps to GitHub by our friends in Solidify. So we are going to send all the links as a follow-up to you to join that one. And Goran, you also have a meetup, true?
Yeah, we have a meetup in Malmo with Sarah Bergman, and it's is machine learning sustainable, and will be great fun. So we will stream it online via the Fukape.
Yes, and also Martin is going to talk about the GitHub in action. You can find all of our upcoming events at aka.ms/devshop. So yes, and for those of you who are watching us via Twitch, stay there because contributing today is going to start right away in 1 minute from now. The rest of you, if you are interested, just move on there because there are a lot of our friends there. They have a lot of things for you to move on. So see you us soon, and ciao. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.